The boarding gate smells like burned coffee and recycled air, and gate B-17 at Dallas-Fort Worth is running 40 minutes late when the woman in seat 14C pulls a worn paperback from her canvas tote bag and opens it to page 1. She has read this book before. The spine says so. Cracked in 3 places, the cover soft as cloth from years of handling. She does not look up when the gate agent announces the delay. She does not look up when the couple beside her begins arguing about the overhead bin. She sits with the quiet self-containment of someone who has waited in places far less comfortable than a padded airport chair, and she turns the page with the patient deliberateness of a woman who has learned that most things eventually resolve themselves. Her name is Ruth Calloway. She is 53 years old. She is wearing a gray cardigan, dark jeans, and a pair of New Balance sneakers that have seen better days. Her hair is cut close, silver at the temples, and her hands, the left one resting on the open book, show the particular kind of weathering that comes from decades of real work. There is a small scar along her left jawline, thin as a wire, that she has never bothered explaining to anyone who asked. She carries no uniform, no flag pin, no bumper sticker politics, nothing on the outside of her that tells you a single thing about the inside. And that is the point, because in 12 minutes, a junior airline supervisor named Derek Fan is going to walk down the jetway, scan this gate with the practiced authority of a man who has confused a name badge for a commission, and make the kind of mistake that echoes. The kind that a room of 40 strangers will talk about for the rest of their lives. The kind that starts with a dismissal and ends with something that cannot be taken back. The question is not what Derek is going to say. The question is what happens when the radio crackles, and why the 2 F-22 Raptors currently circling at 15,000 feet above DFW already know her name. The boarding call comes finally at 6:48 p.m. Gate B-17. Flight 12291 to Washington Dulles. Full aircraft. 162 passengers pushing to their feet at the same moment, the way people do in airports, as if sitting another 90 seconds will cost them something they cannot afford. Ruth closes the paperback at page 1. She has not read a single line. She places it back in the canvas tote, stands without effort, and joins the line in the order her boarding group demands. Group 4. Toward the back. She moves quietly. She takes up exactly the space she requires. The gate agent scans her boarding pass. The machine beeps. She walks down the jetway. She finds 14C. Middle seat. She does not make a face. She lifts the canvas tote into the overhead bin and settles in, and within 2 minutes she is doing what she was doing at the gate, sitting still, hands in her lap, eyes forward. The man in 14B has spread himself generously into the shared armrest. Ruth does not contest it. The woman at the window, 14A, is already asleep against a travel pillow shaped like a horseshoe. The aircraft fills around her. Overhead, bins slam. A child somewhere in the back is announcing its displeasure with the specific pitch that only children and certain military alarms can achieve. Ruth breathes slowly through her nose. And then Derek Fan steps onto the aircraft. He is perhaps 31. He wears his airline supervisor vest with a slight forward lean, as if the vest itself is breasting a current. He has a clipboard, a physical clipboard, in 2024, which tells you something. And he moves down the aisle with the expression of a man performing an inspection. He stops at row 14. "Ma'am." The word lands with the particular weight of a man who has practiced deploying it. "There's been a seating reassignment. We have a family that needs to stay together in this section. I'm going to need you to move to 29E. Ruth looks up at him for the first time. "I'm in 14C, she says. "I selected this seat at booking." "I understand that." Derek does not look at her boarding pass. "But the airline has authority to reassign seating for operational reasons." "What operational reason moves a confirmed seat in row 14 to row 29? A pause. The man in 14B has gone very still. The horseshoe pillow woman is no longer asleep. Ma'am, I've explained the situation. Derek's voice has acquired a slight elevation, the way voices do when authority is questioned by the wrong kind of person. I need you to gather your things and move. There are other passengers trying to board. Something moves through Ruth Calloway's eyes. Not anger, something older than anger, a recognition almost. The look of someone who has been underestimated at such regular intervals that she has developed a kind of taxonomy for it. She recognizes this particular species. She reaches for her tote, but she does not stand up. I'd like to see the reassignment order, she says. Printed or digital, I don't mind. Derek's clipboard drops 2 inches. That's not a passenger's right to... Actually, under DOT regulations Part 250 it is. Ruth's voice is perfectly level. I'm not trying to make your evening difficult. I'd just like to see the paperwork. The cabin has gone very quiet. The child in the back row has stopped its announcement. Even the recycled air seems to have paused. Derek's jaw tightens. He leans forward, and his voice drops to the register that supervisors use when they want the passenger to feel small without anyone technically overhearing. I don't know what you think gives you the right to hold up this aircraft, but I can have you removed. That's within my authority. Ruth looks at him. She looks at him the way a very deep lake looks at a stone that has just been thrown into it. Surface disturbed for one moment. Depths entirely unmoved. Then perhaps we should call the captain, she says. A laugh escapes Derek's mouth. Brief, condescending. He turns to look at the other passengers as if inviting them to share the absurdity. A few people look away. 2 lean forward. The captain, Derek repeats. I believe his name is Captain Hollister, Ruth says, and now something has changed in her voice. A single note, like a key inserted into a lock. Tell him Ruth Calloway is in 14C. I suspect he'll want to come back. Derek stares at her. There is a moment, only a moment, when something uncertain flickers across his face. Then he sets it aside. He is a man with a clipboard, an airport-issued authority, and 30 years of breathing ahead of him. He is not going to be dictated to by a woman in a gray cardigan and worn sneakers. He turns and walks forward. The cabin exhales. The man in 14B leans slightly toward Ruth. You okay? Fine, she says. Thank you. You really know the captain? Ruth opens her tote and sets the paperback on her knee. We've met, she says. She does not elaborate. 3 minutes pass. The last passengers board. The boarding door swings and seals with its mechanical certainty. The aircraft is still at the gate. They have not pushed back. And no one yet knows why. The horseshoe pillow woman is watching Ruth openly now. The man in 14B is pretending to read something on his phone. Ruth turns page 1 of her book. And then the aircraft's intercom crackles. Not the familiar pre-flight murmur. Something brighter, more alert. And before Captain Hollister can speak, a different sound bleeds through. Not the intercom, but the aircraft's own external radio, a frequency bleed that every person in the cabin can hear because they are still on the ground and the cabin is sealed, and sound carries in aluminum tubes the way it carries in cathedrals. The voice that comes through is military, compact, specific. DFW ground. This is Sabre 2-1, F-22 flight of 2. We are holding pattern at 15,000, squawking 7700. We are holding escort posture pending confirmation of passenger Calloway aboard flight 22291. Confirm when ready to push. The cabin does not make a sound. Not one sound. Sabre 2-1. A flight of F-22 Raptors, the most advanced air superiority fighters in the American inventory, is orbiting above DFW International Airport at this moment, waiting for one woman to get to Washington Dulles safely. The intercom clicks. Captain Hollister's voice comes through. He sounds like a man choosing his words from a very carefully maintained collection. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the brief delay. We will begin pushback shortly. Before we do, I need to ask a member of my crew to escort our passenger in seat 14C to the forward cabin. We have a priority accommodation ready." He pauses, and then, with the inflection of a man who has been in enough cockpits to understand the difference between rank on paper and rank in practice, he adds, "Please extend every courtesy to Colonel Calloway." Colonel. The word lands in the cabin like a stone dropped from altitude, not loud, not dramatic, but with an impact that changes the pressure of every conversation that will follow. The man in 14B sets his phone face down on his knee. The horseshoe pillow woman presses her hand to her mouth. 2 rows back, a retired-looking man in a Marine Corps cap stands up halfway, sees the woman in the gray cardigan, and sits back down heavily. His eyes are bright. Ruth Calloway closes her book. She sets it in the tote with the same careful patience she brought to opening it. She smooths the front of her cardigan. She stands, and Derek Fan is standing in the aisle 4 rows forward, clipboard now at his side, color gone from his face in the specific way that color leaves the face of a person who understands, fully and too late, what they have done. Ruth walks toward him. She does not rush. She does not perform. Her stride is the stride of someone accustomed to walking into difficult rooms and leaving them resolved. When she is 1 pace from Derek, she stops. She looks at him for a moment. The whole cabin watches. "The family that needed to sit together," she says quietly. "Give them 14A, B, and C. I'm happy to move." She glances down at the clipboard in his hand. "You just needed to ask." She walks forward. A flight attendant named Carol, silver-haired, 22 years with the airline, who has seen more than most, is waiting at the forward cabin door with an expression Ruth recognizes immediately. The particular look of a woman who has spent a career being underestimated right alongside women like her. Carol opens the door to business class. There is a seat, wide and empty. There is a glass of water, already poured. "Colonel," Carol says softly. Ruth sits. She sets her tote at her feet. She picks up the water and drinks half of it, and her hand is perfectly steady. The aircraft begins to push back. Now, sitting in the relative quiet of the forward cabin, the hum of the engines building beneath the floor, the lights of Dallas beginning to fall away through the oval window, comes the story that Derek Fan will never know in full, the story that the cabin did not hear in the 22 words Captain Hollister chose, the story that takes decades to accumulate and minutes to erase. Ruth Calloway grew up in Lubbock, Texas, 3rd of 4 children, in a house where the windows leaked in January and the swamp cooler failed every August. Her father drove a delivery truck. Her mother worked the early shift at a school cafeteria for 19 years and never once called in sick. Ruth learned early that there was a version of strength that made noise and a version that simply did not stop. She chose the second version before she had language to describe the choice. She enlisted in the Air Force at 18 with a mechanical aptitude score that made her recruiter set down his coffee and read it twice. She was assigned to avionics. Within 2 years, she had qualified as a crew chief on platforms 3 ranks of personnel above her pay grade. Within 4 years, she had been selected for something that was not widely advertised. There are programs in the American military that do not have names on press releases. They exist in budget line items described with acronyms that mean something only to the people inside them. Ruth Calloway entered one such program in 1995 and did not emerge from it for 11 years. During those 11 years, she flew combat sorties over theaters she is still not permitted to name in unclassified settings. She advised on air operations in 2 conflicts that the public knows about under different descriptions. She was extracted once by helicopter from a position that her debrief characterized only as untenable. She does not talk about any of this. The scar along her left jawline was not from a kitchen accident, as she once told a neighbor who asked, but she has no interest in correcting the record. The record corrects itself when it needs to. What Carol, the flight attendant, knows, what Captain Hollister knows, what Sabre 2-1 and 2-2 orbiting silently above the clouds know, is that Ruth Calloway holds the rank of colonel in the United States Air Force, currently attached to a Pentagon advisory office so specific in its function that fewer than 40 people in the country understand what it actually does. She is traveling to Washington tonight because someone who runs one of those 40 positions has asked for her counsel on something that will not make the news, but will affect the lives of people who never knew she existed. She is, in every technical and actual sense, one of the most qualified human beings on this aircraft. She was sitting in seat 14C with a worn paperback and a gray cardigan because she has never once in her life needed the outside of herself to tell people what the inside already knew. The aircraft levels at 35,000 feet. The seatbelt sign chimes off. Somewhere behind the curtain in economy, a family is settling into seats 14A, B, and C, a mother and two young children who needed to be together. Ruth does not know their names. She does not need to. Carol brings a second glass of water, then crouches briefly beside the seat. "The captain wanted me to tell you something," Carol says. "He says he flew F-16s out of Aviano in '99. He says if your unit was the one he thinks it was, he owes you a debt." Ruth absorbs this. "Tell him we're even," she says. "He got me to Dulles once before when nothing else was flying." Carol looks at her for a moment with something that has no quick name. "Yes, ma'am," she says, and straightens, and walks back through the curtain. Ruth turns to the window. The American night below is vast and scattered with lights. Farmhouses, highway exchanges, the orange grids of cities that go all the way to the dark edge of the horizon. She has looked down at this country from much higher altitudes, at speeds this aircraft cannot approach, through canopies rated for conditions this Boeing was never designed to meet. She has looked down at it in the deep hours before dawn when all of those lights were below and the stars were above, and there was nothing between her and both except velocity and training and the kind of trust you build over years with people whose names you knew before you knew their faces. She misses that sometimes. The altitude, the clarity, the way everything complicated on the ground resolved from up there into simply the mission, the terrain, the people counting on you to come back. She does not miss the parts that cost her what they cost. She has made her peace with the accounting. Most days. The paperback is still in the tote bag at her feet. She has not read a single page of it tonight, and she will not, she knows this now, with the particular certainty of someone who understands their own patterns. She bought this book 3 weeks ago at a used bookstore in Alexandria because the cover reminded her of a painting in her mother's kitchen. She carries it for the same reason some people carry photographs, because the object itself is the thing, not the reading. Her mother passed 6 years ago. Lubbock, January. The windows still leaked. Ruth pressed her hand flat against the kitchen wall when they took the painting down, as if the plaster still held some warmth from all the years of the painting being there. Perhaps it did. She was not a woman who had ever been much for sentiment, and so when sentiment arrived, she had learned to let it do what it needed to do without interrupting it. The lights outside the window multiply as the aircraft begins its long eastward slide. The Appalachians are down there in the dark. Ridge lines she has crossed in worse weather than this, in aircraft that were not asking for her patience. A chime sounds. The seatbelt light returns. 40 minutes out from Dulles. Carol comes back through the curtain, and this time she pauses without crouching, her hand resting briefly on the seat back in front of Ruth's, and her face carries something deliberate. "There's a man in row 22, Carol says quietly. "He says his name is Sergeant Dwight Okafor. He's 24. He's on his way back to Fort Myer for a ceremony." A pause. "He recognized your name when the captain announced it. He's been up here 3 times to ask if he could say something to you, and I've sent him back twice because I didn't want to bother you, but—" Carol stops. He's crying, very quietly, the way those boys do when they're trying not to. Ruth is still for a moment. "Send him up," she says. The young man who appears from behind the curtain is large in the physical sense, broad-shouldered, army dress uniform, clean-shaved. But he stands at the edge of the forward cabin with the posture of someone who has been made to feel for a long time that he is too much, too big, too much space taken, too much noise made. He is indeed trying very hard not to cry and not quite succeeding. "Colonel Calloway," he says. "Sit down, son." She gestures to the empty seat across the aisle. He sits. He presses his hands between his knees. "I was with the 82nd, he says. 3 deployments. My last rotation, we were operating in a corridor that got very bad very fast. Air support didn't exist, and then it did." He swallows. "We didn't know who called it or how, but the aircraft that came were not ones we'd been told to expect, and whoever directed that support, they didn't just pull us out. They held the corridor for 6 hours. 6 hours. My sergeant said the call sign on the net was something that shouldn't have existed." He stops. He is looking at her hands. The call sign was quiet rank. The cabin hums around them. Ruth Calloway holds very still. Quiet rank. The call sign has not been spoken aloud to her in 4 years. She has not heard it from a stranger's mouth in longer than that. It lives in a file that is not accessible through normal channels and is referenced in a citation that sits in a box on a shelf in her apartment in Alexandria, behind a row of books, in an envelope she has not opened since the night it was delivered. The envelope from the hook. The one that has been sealed. Tonight, flying above the dark American continent at 35,000 feet, 40 minutes from Washington, Ruth Calloway feels something shift in her chest, the particular movement of something that has been weight-bearing for a very long time and has just been, for one moment, set down. "We got home," Dwight Okafor says. The tears are running freely now, and he is not trying to stop them anymore. "All of us, every single one. And I've spent 3 years trying to find out who Quiet Rank was, because I needed to say something to them, and I didn't have a way, and then tonight—" He shakes his head. "Tonight, the captain says your name." Ruth looks at him for a long time. This young man who got home. This young man whose sergeant somewhere told him a call sign that traveled through classified nets and debriefs and years of institutional forgetting and arrived tonight in seat 22 of Flight 2291 to Dulles. "You're going to Fort Myer for a ceremony," she says. He nods. "Promotion, staff sergeant." "Good." Her voice is quiet. "That's good." She reaches into the canvas tote. She does not take out the paperback. She takes out something smaller, a coin, the kind that military units use, heavier than a quarter, worn on its edges from years of handling. On one face, an aircraft rendered in dark relief. On the other, 2 words. Quiet Rank. She holds it out to him. His hand closes around it, and he looks at it, and his whole face does the thing that faces do when a years-long question finally resolves itself into a single solid object. He grips it with both hands. He bows his head. His shoulders work against something enormous, and finally, mostly, still. "Thank you," he says. He says it the way people say things they have been holding for years. Not easily, but completely. "No," Ruth says. "Thank you for getting home." He stands. He straightens his uniform with the automatic precision of a soldier returning to posture. He looks at her one final time. He renders a salute. Ruth Calloway, retired combat colonel, quiet rank, holder of a citation in an envelope that has sat unopened for 4 years, returns it. He walks back through the curtain. The aircraft descends. The lights of the Virginia sprawl appear below, spreading to meet them, and Dulles appears in its flat, organized geometry, runways lit like sentences written in amber. The wheels find the ground with the gentle certainty of a well-flown approach, and the engines reverse, and Flight 2291 slows and turns and finds its gate. The cabin stirs. Bags come down. People become again the individuals they were before the radio crackled, though something in the atmosphere of row 14 and the rows around it has not quite returned to what it was. Ruth stands. She lifts her canvas tote. She follows Carol to the forward door. On the jetway, Carol stops her. "Colonel." She reaches into her jacket pocket and produces a small folded paper. "The two pilots, Sabre 2-1 and 2-2. They asked ground control to pass a message." She unfolds